Thank you for coming. As you know, this is the Carbondale version of Naturalist Nights. It happens at 5:30 every Wednesday here, and at 7 o'clock up in Aspen at ACES at Hallam Lake. And our partners are ACES, Wilderness Workshop, and the Roaring Fork Audubon. And this week we have a special partner, CCAH, so we're really happy to have them along. So thanks, Amy. Also, big thanks to our sponsors. Without them, we wouldn't be able to film the series. So you can actually go online to the Wilderness Workshop's website or ACES and actually watch every single one of our Naturalist Nights presentations. So that's pretty fun to have. Our featured sponsor tonight is Reese Henry and Company, so special thanks to them. And tonight we've got a Wilderness and Arts Pecha Kucha. So I'm guessing everybody in here knows what a Pecha Kucha is, but if you don't, it actually originated in Japan. It's a modern Japanese storytelling tradition that they started up as a way to help architects not talk too much, basically. They limited them to 20 seconds per slide. So every presentation, our presenters will speak for only 20 seconds per slide for 20 slides. So I think it comes out to somewhere around 6 or 7 minutes a piece. So first up tonight, let's see here. We're going to do Jill Schur. So Jill Schur is a local artist here in Carbondale, and her presentation. Oh, yay, Jill!
Okay, a little bit closer, like that. Okay. Okay.
All right, ready?
No, but. Okay.
I think you're going.
Okay, so as you know, I'm Jill Schur. I'm a fiber artist from Carbondale, and I was able to do an Artist in the Wilderness residency in the summer of 2013. And the way I decided to frame it, since I live here, is to do day hikes. So the first hike I took was up in Hay Park, which probably many of you know. And I just decided to take photographs of everything that was beautiful or inspired me or interested me. So I ended up coming home, and you can shift. I ended up coming home with tons of photographs of all sorts of things. So this was that same day, and it was looking down over East Cypress Creek. And I took a lot of photos of wildflowers and also of vistas, and it was in early July, and so wildflower season was at its height. So I was really lucky enough to, on several of the hikes, I was just overwhelmed with the beauty of all the flowers that were in bloom. So I took these as reference for work that I would do in the studio later on, and I would go into the studio at night and try to process some of the ideas of what was coming to me, but it was hard because it was so overwhelming, and so I tried different things, and eventually one of the pieces that came out of the hiking and the weeks is this piece. The next 5 slides are about this. It's called Mother's Lap, and it came out of a conversation that I had with Dave Reed from Wilderness Workshop when we were on a hike up in Thompson Creek trailhead in the Thompson Divide, where he asked me to please just talk about what I thought the relationship between humans and nature was. So in thinking about it and how we live on the earth and how we're really in the arms of the earth and it's our mother, I felt like, we live in the embrace of the mother, and the imagery of this rocking chair came to me. So the rocking chair is a wooden base. It's a solid chair, and then I made all this felt that I encased it in, and then I created the bits and pieces, a lot of them directly from the photographs, like these mule's ears, and I mean, just a lot of the things that are on there I was able to go back to the photographs and look at them for more detail. I think that's all I have to say about that. You can see coneflowers, and there are ferns that came from a walk up on Avalanche Creek that I was able to get really good photographs from. So, bees and moss. So this was from up on Lime Creek Canyon, which Leslie was there with me. And it was so incredibly beautiful looking out over it. But what I was particularly interested were the cliffs and the crevices or texture that I would see, and also the way erosion and water running down cliffs would affect the actual formations. Because I had been working with the idea of things that are hidden and that are exposed, and I'd been working with that for a couple of years, and I had a really good chance of kind of crystallizing what that meant. So this is still from Lime Creek. It's just the way the canyons come together and there are these openings. It was really stunning. This is a piece I call Fault Lines that I actually just finished last week, but it's really coming directly out of that imagery and those ideas of what happens when things are exposed or are broken open and what gets shown or what you can see. This is from the walk up Thompson Creek Trail. It was just so spectacular. Obviously, I took that because the aspens are beautiful and the light is beautiful, but I don't have anything specific to show that came from that slide yet. This was in Seven Castles Creek, and that was, I guess, the next to the last hike I took. And it was amazing because the environment, you go through so many different twists and turns, and every little area has something new. It was really visually overwhelming. This is a piece that came actually from the Avalanche Creek Trail, the Thompson Creek Trail, where I looked into a tree that was hollow. And so this was about partly what is hidden and what is shown, and then also a symbiotic relationship between decay and rebirth. And so those are eggs that are inside that vessel, but are nesting inside a rotted, supposedly this is a felt piece, but they're resting inside a rotted vessel. This was another piece that came out of those walks. It's just an abstract wood grain vessel where I went with the wood grains and just expanded it into a really large form. So. This is the last slide, and it also is another vessel that's looking at decay and growth in symbiotic relationships. It's a mushroom vessel that is turkey tail mushrooms, which I didn't see, on the hike, but it was just part of that process of how things work. Okay, thanks.
All right, so next up we've got Kelly Carlin. He's going to be showing us his adventure through the wilderness, Arctic wilderness.
So my name's Kelly Carlin. I live here in Carbondale, and these are photos from a trip I took in 2007, so a little while ago now, but I think probably the prettiest trip I've taken. I was working as a canoe guide in Minnesota, where I'm originally from, and was taking a group of 17-year-old boys on a trip to the Canadian Arctic. So we began the trip with a 5-day drive from Minneapolis to Yellowknife, and then we flew an hour and a half on a bush flight from Yellowknife to the northeast to the Bailey River. It's a tributary of the Back River, which is the largest continuously Arctic river in North America. So we started on the Bailey River, and we flowed into the Back River. This is around June 30th or so. And when it's at its peak flow, it's I want to say that it's about as big as the Mississippi, but it peaks only for a few days every summer because of the Arctic weather. I've done a lot of hiking in mountains, and I've only done this one trip in the tundra, and the elevations in the tundra are actually a lot more subtle than they are in the mountains, but it's all glaciated. So we would paddle to eskers and climb up these eskers. So eskers are old riverbeds underneath glaciers, and when the glaciers would retreat, you have these long, snaking, sometimes 50-mile long hills, these ribbon hills that are maybe 30 feet high, maybe 300 feet high, and we would camp on top of them. The Inuit traditionally would camp on top of them because that's where you get a bit of a breeze to keep the mosquitoes and the black flies off. When we began our trip, we had sunlight, not direct sunlight, but we were a little ways south of the Arctic Circle, and we had light 24 hours a day. The wind in the Arctic can be quite strong, and it can make canoeing impossible. So we would paddle at night sometimes. We'd sleep during the day in the sun, and we would wake up at 8 p.m. and we would paddle through the night. So we went from the Bailey River to the Back River, and we were on the Bailey in the Back going downstream for about the first 26 days or so. We didn't see anyone for the entire trip. Didn't see a human footprint for the entire trip. It's not a wilderness area. It's just open country. So you don't use a permit. You're not in a wilderness area. You're on, I should say, Inuit-owned land. It's in the province of Nunavut, which is a semi-autonomous native province in northern Canada. The wind was very strong, so sometimes we'd pass the time while we're waiting for the wind to die down by flying kites made from tents. There were old cabins from more recent folks, and then there were sometimes much older things. We found occasional bone fish hooks in the sand. It's a very elemental, it feels elemental, I guess, coming from down here. An elemental landscape. It's unlike any place I've ever been. I've always felt like someone has showed me pictures or told me stories about a place, and I go and it looks like that. And this is a place that people don't talk about and you don't see pictures, and so it felt fresh in a way that no other place I've traveled has felt. The weather systems would roll off of the Arctic sometimes, but generally it's a desert. There's very little moisture. It's just that the moisture is frozen so much of the year, and there's permafrost everywhere. So this is one of the storms that we had that rolled off of the Arctic. We had 4 canoes. We had a bug tent, so we could cook inside the bug tent if there was no breeze. Our bugs were not that bad, but we had almost no black flies. Sometimes plenty of mosquitoes. The white water is also large, and we ran as much of it as we could in our open canoes, and we did a fair amount of portaging, which I think is maybe kind of a Canadian or Minnesotan or Mainer thing to do. I don't think people portage maybe that much in the American West. And then we lined sometimes, so we would walk alongside rivers with painter lines holding onto our boats. We had no food drops. We brought all of our food, and our food for 8 people was, I think it was around, I want to say 800 pounds or 900 pounds of food. I'm not sure if that's right. The boats were very low when we started. There's a shot of us portaging. We went downstream for the first 25, 26 days, and then we went upstream on the Meadowbank River. The Back River flows into the Arctic, and we needed to go upstream to get down to Baker Lake, which is an Inuit town on a large inlet in the middle of Nunavut. And that's the Nunavut flag we were flying with. I want to say a nuckshuck. Because there's no other material to work with, the natives would leave stones everywhere to indicate directions or to serve as scarecrows for caribou. So they would chase herds of caribou off a cliff and use rocks shaped like people or roughly like people to scare them towards the cliff. We sometimes were windbound during the day, so we would just pull over and we would nap for a few hours and wait for the wind to die down. In this slide here on the bottom right, there's a large caribou herd. This is kind of at dusk. It was the Beverly caribou herd, which I think is between 30,000 and 50,000 caribou. It was the front end of the caribou. So we were portaging around this hill, and the caribou came in, and the caribou were followed by the wheat caribou, and the wheat caribou were followed by the wolves. The students I was working with, or campers as we call them there, were involved in the navigation and the leadership. So we would go over the maps every day and talk about where we expected whitewater to be, where we wanted to camp. And it's the final trip for these students. So most of them had done 4 or 5 progressive trips in Minnesota and in Ontario or Manitoba. And this was the final trip that they did with our program.
So up next we have Paul Hutton-Tower. He's going to be taking us on a wild edible journey.
Yes. Yes. I do a lot of work with wild edible plants, and actually just recently started a business wildcrafting and wholesaling wild edible plants. So here we go. Mostly it's going to be just going through different plants, all our different friends and allies, but I'll start. This is just our home, Carbondale, Glenwood, Grand Junction down there, so you can see the Thompson Divide and the Grand Mesa. Up here would be the flat tops, just to kind of base us in where all these plants live and where we live, so that just because that's where I like to begin. Also, I like to start with talks on paradigm, and my whole paradigm is that as humans, we're furry, although two-leggers, we are animals, and we're cruising around the woods, and so as that is the case, we are nature working, regardless what our impact is, we have an impact. And so whenever I'm out in the woods, I have harvesting guidelines that I follow. This is a pretty standard harvesting guideline list. I'll just let you kind of read through them. The main ones to kind of pay attention to are, are there chemical contaminations? Are the stands healthy and all that? So we'll just start. Whoa, you skipped 2 there. Sorry, you skipped 1. Back. Yeah, there you go. Okay, so the first plant, serviceberries. Everybody knows serviceberries. They're the bear's favorite food. There they are. They're delicious. This is their leaf. That very. It's very easy to tell the leaf because it's like round with a serrated edge. They're almost like a blueberry, absolutely fantastic. Sometimes they're in complete abundance and sometimes there's nothing. We saw that in the last 2 years. We had a really abundant year, and then last year was like real bad. Osha root, bear root. This is a very strong medicinal plant. Many people are familiar with this plant. It's in the carrot family. You can see the flowers here, and the leaves very much look like carrot. It's a very strong smelling and tasting root. Next is Arnica. Osha is like an internal medicine. Arnica is an external medicine. You use it for sore muscles and things. It's like deep tissue healing. Around here, it has a heart-shaped leaf with serrated edges. A beautiful flower. The smell is absolutely incredible, and it's everywhere, carpeting the woods. Then stinging nettle, this is probably my favorite. When I harvest, my hands are numb for like 5 days afterwards because it just stings me all the time, but it's very nutritive. And when you see this, don't harvest it because it says, "I'm seeding, don't mess with me." We have Oregon Grape. Oregon Grape root is an amazing plant. It's like our version of golden seal. It has a yellow layer on the inside of the root that contains berberine, which is antifungal, antiviral, and antibacterial. So it's like a mild healing herb. Healing herb, sure. Bluebells are a delicious salad green. They're in the family of comfrey. And you see them everywhere. They're a very common wildflower. People take pictures of them all the time, but try it. It tastes like cucumbers and great for salads. This is fireweed. Fireweed is also a delicious flower salad. When it looks like this in the early spring, you can take it and just cook the top like shoots, about this much of it, and it's almost like a asparagus with a little bit of an extra twinge in the flavor. Valerian root, I think many people are familiar with Valerian root, but it grows all over in the high country here. It looks very similar, the flower looks very similar to that of Osha, but a sleep aid, and you can use the roots and the flowers. The flowers are more mild, and you could do like a baby version of a valerian tea. There's thimbleberry. I love thimbleberries. I didn't put raspberries on here because everybody knows what raspberries are, but thimbleberries are amazing. They're not as abundant in terms of berry production, but taste like you took a raspberry, turned it into a jam, and then put it back on the bush. Currants, you can see all the different varieties of currants that there are. We have just about every variety of currant that there is around here. And their leaves are distinct depending on what variety it is, but I think that everybody sees them all over the place, and they're delicious. Horsetail is an amazing herb. It grows everywhere as well. You can harvest it almost all year round. The main thing to say about horsetail is that it contains a large quantity of silica, so it's really good for your nails and your hair and your teeth. And actually can also help heal pruning wounds on trees. Aspen buds are really incredible. Everybody's familiar with aspens, but and maybe you're familiar with like the sunscreen of aspen, but aspen buds contain resins that are very healing, antibacterial, and antifungal. It's one of the main components in propolis, at least in these parts. Bees go and collect tree resins to kind of seal their hive, and it's very powerful medicine. Fir tips. I love fir tips. I don't know if anybody here has had fir tip tea, but it is absolutely amazing, the flavor. They are very rich in vitamin C, and you collect them like this in the spring when they're super green and tender. And you can always tell because they're like bright green, where the old growth is not so much. Then we have mushrooms. Everybody loves mushrooms. That's all the craze. That's what most people know about. Chanterelles are pretty common around here. They like to hang around fir trees and rocks. Just a little tip. Then another amazing edible mushroom is the king bolete. It has pores on the underside instead of gills. If it gets too old, it's like really wormy and like weird. So this is ideal and younger. But anything beyond that, they open their cap fully at some point, and once it's like that, they're a little bit more mushy and wormy and things. Woodier mushrooms are pretty common. You probably see these around, but most people are like, "Oh, that's weird. I don't want to mess with it." It's really gelatinous. It looks just like an ear, but they're actually a very powerful Chinese medicine used in soups, and that's pretty much. I just gave you a short array of plants, and I like to end it with the fact that as humans, it's our responsibility to also help our friends, so let's plant all these plants everywhere, and then we'll have abundance of wild food everywhere we are.
Awesome. So up next we have Russ Christwell. And he's going to talk about his art-inspired, nature-inspired art, art-inspired nature.
This is my first time doing this, so you'll have to bear with me. I'm not nearly as professional as the rest of these people. I'm very I am very unprofessional. So I want you to look at this and think about what you see. I see form, contrast, colors, seasons, life, death, continuance. It's one of the inspirations for me. These are taken up on Red Hill. I just did a hike a couple weeks ago after I found out I was going to do this. So this is the same thing. The forms, the contrasts, the different colors, different textures. Art's defined as, and this is a work in progress. Now this is my shop. This is where I do a lot of putting it together. What I do is mostly found object sculpture. So the photographs aren't that great until we get to the end. But art is defined as something that is created with imagination and skill, and that is beautiful and that expresses important ideas and feelings. This is another piece in progress down in here. This is where I do my work. On the left, you can kind of see a little shelves where I do stockpiling. So what I do here is I work on something and then I put it away. This is the one that really inspired me. It's taken out in the desert. This is the one that reminds me of Melanie. As a dancer, the lines and the different rocks, the combination of rock and wood, really, that to me is how I try to get things. This is a piece I did called a mammoth. Everything is found. I try to do things the way they're found. I try not to adjust them anyway. That's a piece of sea glass from Maine, is an eye. The wood I found up on the flat tops. There's an old post in the background. It's an old piece of spring steel. This I took an old barrel, an old keg of nail keg, and then changed it around and made a piece called Stargate. So I try to use it as it is, but mixing it up. None of the pieces have been trimmed. And it's kind of my... So this, if you look at this and you say, what is this? And what does it make? What do you see here? Elephant. Elephant's a good one. A circle that's being made. It's actually a piece of seaweed. What do you call it? Driftwood, thank you, in the Oregon coast. This is another work in progress. I call it the skiscape. It's got an old barrel ring. It's got the base of 5 different skis in it. Got the pieces of, on the top are pieces of tiles that I found washed up in the shore in the Greek islands. It's got a fishing lure. It's got some old door hardware. This one's real simple. This one's got a bone, a marble, a piece of wood, and some feathers. And then the simplicity of it really appeals to me, like haiku. Then I got the other side of it. Go ahead and click this one. So I got one image, one piece, 2 images. So go back again. You can see, so we have 2 different looks. Okay. Off the same thing. This is one of the inspirations I have. This is a pine cone. Well, it's actually, it's a pinyon pine cone, a small rock, some ice, mud, water, but just the form and stuff. It was up on Red Hill. I look at these and I try to make work that is like a haiku of a nature hike. This is what I call the hugging tree. It's up on Red Hill. It's real close to the top of Blue Ribbon. And I'm sure everybody's gone in and got a hug from it. If you haven't, next time you go by, you can stand in it and it will reach around you. I meditate in this a lot when I'm hiking. So then I came up with, this is a piece of rock from the Red Hill area, 2 pieces of wood, and a little moon I found at a yard sale. And the pipes from my boiler in the background. This is another work in progress. This is something I don't even know what it's going to be yet. But I've got these elements that I'm working with, an old stump, some rings, some copper, and some old pieces of wood. What I do is I put them down, I play with them, I leave them alone, I come back to them, I play with them, I start something else. This is my stockpile of odds and ends that I've gathered walking through the woods. There's pieces of wood, there's pieces of junk, there's copper pipe, little pieces, there's some bolts and an old tin can. And I just have this stuff and I put it together. Of course, most of our inspiration is, of course, from our natural splendor that we have here. And I'm sure all of you know that. So one of the things that I do is looking down on this, it's too easy to make art when you live in a place like this. But then every once in a while, you need to participate in somebody else's art. Let yourself go. And this was, I was participating in a movie. And they kind of made us up and we had a good time. So let yourself go, have fun. Anybody can do it.
I think this would be a good time to move into some question and answer. I don't know about you guys, but I'm definitely pretty inspired by our Pecha Kucha presenters tonight. So if anybody has a question for one of our 4 presenters or wants to inquire more, Mary in the back, make sure you're talking to this mic here so we catch it on film here.
Okay. So I would love to have was a wild crafting. I do an outdoor adventure preschool. So can we talk? That'd be great. We're out in the forest all the time. We're out on Fridays. So we haven't decided what forest we're going to. But as the spring comes, I'd love to have you come out on a hike with us. And that'd be awesome. Thank you. Teach these little kids how to eat in the forest things.
Can I just say something?
Sure.
I've taken some kids on wild plant walks. My favorite moment that I've ever had is having one of them with his jacket on backwards and his hood filled with greens. And he would literally just walk along and like put his head down, eat some, and just keep walking. It was the best.
All right, anybody else?
Thank you. This question's for Kelly. Is he? Oh, there. I'm wondering, what was the organization that sponsored this, the trip? Yeah.
So it was with a YMCA camp in Minnesota called Minogen, and there's.
Oh, hold on one second.
It was with a YMCA wilderness camp called Minogen in Minnesota, and there are another 2 camps in the Midwest, like at Widgiewagon and Manitowish, that do just wilderness tripping. So they work with kids. All 3 camps work with kids from 12 to 18, and they start with 3-day trips or 4-day trips in northern Wisconsin or in the Boundary Waters, and they all work up to month-and-a-half-long trips in the Brooks Range in Alaska or the Wrangell St. Elias, or for canoeing in the Canadian Arctic. We were on the Back River is what you would find on a map. So northeast of Yellowknife, northeast of the Great Slave Lake, and then ending near the northwest side of Hudson Bay.
Anybody else? All right. Well, we do have this short clip from the Wilderness Workshop Arts and Wilderness program. So if I can switch to that, it's kind of a blend of what we've seen tonight. Wilderness Workshop picks 1 or 2 artists every summer, and actually gives them the opportunity to go out into the wild and for a certain amount of time and make art based on their experience. It's kind of like a artist grant.
And we have the filmmaker here tonight as well.
Oh, gracious. Did you just appear?
I'm sorry?
Have you been here the whole time?
Yes. Well, I sneaked in a bit late, but yes.
Great.
If people are creating pieces of art that are representative of these incredibly special places that we're lucky enough to live near, it's one way of sharing the beauty of those places.
Artists in wilderness is really kind of like a retreat. And wilderness it's much more a part of my work than I probably realized earlier on, that it's kind of the backdrop for a lot of my, just ideas, intention, purpose.
It's been great to work with the Artists in Wilderness program and to meet people that aren't necessarily artists, that are lovers of the backcountry and protectors of the wilderness, and they get involved with an art program. That's fantastic.
My name is Trent Burkett. I live near San Luis Obispo in California. I'm a practicing artist, and I also teach. I'm a full professor at University of the Pacific in Stockton, California, and chair of the art department there. So I teach sculpture and ceramics mostly. The idea of wilderness, is about some type of departure from our normal human-invented landscape, whatever that means, cities, whatnot, So getting out into wilderness really means getting away from all those things. To go into those places is that something happens there, for me, certainly. The project that I kind of planned for this evolved a little bit last summer in the mountains in the Sierras. What it became was literally taking this idea of taking a series of molds or impressions from places in the landscape, specifically like rock formations. There's a little crystal right here, little crystalline structures. I like the spine that kind of flows through here. I've always really been interested in this kind of sculpted landscape and wanting in some way to capture it. But I knew that trying to capture it, by trying to recreate it or sculpt it, wouldn't work. And so that's sort of how I devised this mold system, that would then be the logical step to use my knowledge and expertise with taking molds. So this is my basic tools. And this is the start. This is basically used to seal this up like a gasket. And these are the plaster packets. So I have this makes one mold. I've prefigured this out. In my studio, I did a whole mock-up with this frame. I made the frame, I got my tools, I figured out what I needed. Thought about anything that could go wrong in the field. I measured out the plaster and figured out exactly how much plaster it takes to fill that frame with the right amount of water. So I figured all this out and made these packets back at my studio and shipped them all out here, ready to go, to drop in my pack and head out. This taps out some of the bubbles. I had kind of studied this area and the maps, and I knew I wanted to go up the Yule Creek drainage, which is kind of also by the Marble Mine. And so that sort of surrounds one part of the Treasure Mountain cap. And then I was interested in some of the historical aspects too, like the town of Crystal. So I did go up the Crystal Road twice and took a series of impressions there. This last week and the part of this process that I've completed are really just maybe half of the process. These will then get shipped back to California to my studio. I'll have this set of molds, and from those I will make porcelain tiles and use them then to create an actual artwork. I'm still going to have, I think, time to sort of reflect. By having these, come with me, I'll know where each of those was from, and I'm still going to be thinking about those spots. And how could you not have those little associated memories with each of those tiles for where you were at that time? I'm going to remember that. I'm going to be thinking about that.
I'm Terry Talty, and I've been working with Stuart for a long time, making public sculpture and more temporary sculpture projects.
And my name's Stuart Bremner, and I've been doing sculpture for a long time. Metalwork mostly, from anything from jewelry to a footbridge. Today we set up the Invisible Aerovanes, and it's a piece that we came up with for the Artists in the Wilderness program. The piece is a group of weather vanes, and the reason that we group them is that they can have a little bit of a conversation about the wind. They're not always in agreement with where the wind's coming from, and if the wind's a little swirly, they may all be pointing in different directions. Our initial thought with these was that everywhere around here are these hidden gems and these other, wilderness areas in any direction you could walk and run into them. And so why not have something that's an indicator that at any given moment, depending on which way the wind is blowing, it is pointing
to something.
At something wild.
Hey, look at this, look at that. We went to the lakes of Lake Ridge and looked out on Thompson Divide.
Right.
We got to see all of Thompson Divide in yellow. That was just beautiful.
When we were walking around, we just sort of brainstormed a lot of ideas.
Well, and you know where we were, Stuart, I think we really came up with this idea was at the fins. Because those are such a fantastic, it's just constantly some new thing to look at every minute, every step you take.
And although these pieces are tighter together, I think they sort of reflect the orientation we're feeling of walking around and walking through the fins as you go around things. I've been playing around with the idea of making forms that when they get snowed on, you get a mound of snow. And that snow forms a shape. So nature builds the sculpture, and these aerovanes will do that. They're made of screen, so they're invisible, and when it snows, they will create a nice white, soft shape. And one thing that we added to it is that when the weight of the snow is on it, the bearing will lock in position and it will stop moving, so that when it's most visible, it is no longer an indicator of which way the wind's coming from. It more tells a story of where it was when it was snowing.
If we hadn't applied to be the artist in the wilderness, we never would have come over here. We wouldn't have been honed in, focused on trying to make something that talks about what we saw and what we experienced hanging out with the environmental folks, we would never have made this. It's such a great opportunity. It just worked out brilliantly.
Yeah, it's good. Well, it was a way to change our perspective on this part of the world, and create a piece that hopefully can engage other people and change their perspective on the world that they live in.
Yeah, well, we're really thankful for this opportunity.
I'm Jill Scher, and I am a fiber artist, and I work primarily with felt. I work with natural fibers, I work with natural dyes, and my work is divided between functional work, wearable art, and then more sculptural work and more conceptual work. Because of the fact that I live in the valley, I wanted to frame my residency in terms of day hikes.
This is incredibly biodiverse, this sort of elevation zone.
One of the day hikes that I took during that week was up through the Thompson Divide with members of Wilderness Workshop. The fact that I was out there really to just take in the images that I was seeing, it gave me permission to just look and just to imagine. And these are so beautiful. I took a lot of photographs, and at night, I just had those images translating into felted pieces, kept coming to me and coming to me. At night or in the late afternoon, I would come into my studio, do sketches, and try to start conceptualizing how those images and sketches could be translated into the ideas that I had. One of the things that I was experimenting with in terms of texture after one of the hikes was how to create dimensional pieces where there would be pockets and also crevices, so that I could slice into it and there would be these crevices showing what was inside. Part of it was erosion and cliffs, when things are opened up and there are cracks and you're seeing what's in the cracks. And I wanted to be able to try to capture that in a piece. Oh, wow. This is amazing. Another of the day hikes that I took that week was up the Seven Castles Creek, up the Frying Pan near Basalt. It was so magical. You're in this canyon and you're walking between these walls. It's like you're in a magical land. There were so many textures between the rock walls and what grew in there, and moss on the wall, and water running down the wall. Around every corner, there was something new to see. It was so beautiful. I felt like I'd been to another world entirely when we came out of there. Yeah. I've done 2 pieces that came out of my hikes for Wilderness Workshop. They were both vessels. The mother's lap rocking chair really came from that hike that we took up in Thompson Divide. And the metaphor was, it's our mother, and that we sit in the embrace of our mother, which is planet Earth. The fact that Wilderness Workshop does this, it's placing a value on what our interactions with the wilderness is, and that art is important too. I mean, I feel like all of that is important. And I'm incredibly grateful to them for having that residency program.
fundraiser, really, with a silent auction where they auction the pieces. And it's always very hard as an editor anyway, just to bring that down. But there was much more of a story to be told. I would like to do a longer, put together a longer film with Jill. Really, would have been fun. And certainly the sculptor who did the molds, I would just, he was a really tough guy, and he hiked and hiked for days, and I huffed and puffed after him, with all my equipment. But fortunately, he was slowed down a bit too, because he'd come from sea level, so he was at our altitude, fortunately, and he had a huge pack with all his plaster, his kit. So fortunately, it kind of evened us out, more or less, just filming that. But it was very fun to follow them around and follow their work.
So, how does one apply to field artist in wilderness?
Okay. I think you actually know this.
Well, I don't know, I don't know tons about that, but there is an application process. I believe that this year's artists in wilderness have already been chosen. My decision, if you like, to actually make a film about these artists was that I think it was the first time that they had chosen three-dimensional artists. Prior to that, it was more painting or drawing, which I think is perhaps sometimes more accessible. As soon as I heard that they were doing three-dimensional work, and particularly with the aeroveins, for instance, that to some people, you could see, in fact, my filming started with the aeroveins. And when I met Terry and Stuart and saw them, and you could see that some people would think, what's that got to do with wilderness, So I thought that it would really be worthwhile to document their, their process and everything. So that's what I did as far as the three-dimensional work went. So I don't know what time of the year the application process is, but it is an annual event, and I would imagine that the first stopping place is probably Wilderness Workshop. Mary Dominic, who is on the board of the Wilderness Workshop, is actually the founder and the director of the program. And so Mary, she started this, I want to say 5 years ago or so. So, oh, that's right, okay. Well, I should know that. Usually, yes, I guess so. That some of the filming happened in the winter, but that was because the pieces were still, installed then. Yes, I don't suppose that we have much information on that applying, but I would start with the Wilderness Workshop, and they will certainly direct people.
When they're taking applications, there's a link on the website that is available.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so I think typically they maybe chosen, three. Well, this time, of course, it was 3 artists.
That time they chose 4, and they divided them up between 2012 and 2013, so there were 2 each year.
Right.
I think it's normally 2 each year. But sometimes if they get a lot of applications, they'll go ahead and choose 4, and they'll just move them into the next year.
Right. But it's open to all artists to apply. Yeah. Yes.
Great, well, thanks so much. I thought you captured a lot in that 15 minutes. So, all right, well, thank you for coming tonight. I think we have some more cookies if you want a cookie on your way out. And tune in next week for a talk by a man from the Wilderness Society. He's going to talk about his lands and his work in protecting wildlands in Montana area from being developed for natural gas. So we can really learn a couple things from him about our work in protecting the Thompson Divide. So thanks again for coming.
Thank you.